Okay, thanks for the introduction, Cameron. So my name's Danny. I'm a research program manager at the Access to Medicine Foundation, and I have a responsibility for delivering the Access to Medicine Index. So I'm going to make a quick caveat today. So we're in the midst of sort of analyzing company data from the 20 companies that we measure for the 2018 index. Sadly, I'm not going to be able to share any of the findings from that. For that, you're going to need to wait until November, which is when we're going to publish the next edition. Okay, so the Access to Medicine Foundation, which is where I work, what we do is we conduct research on the incentives for pharmaceutical companies to engage in access to medicine. We're an independent organization, not for profit. We don't take any funding from the pharmaceutical industry. What we do, though, is take funding from these organizations: the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands, UK AIDS, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Dutch National Postcode Lottery. One of the things we really prize is our multi-stakeholder approach. We go through a solid year of methodology engagement, which we use to develop the framework against which we measure companies' performance in access to medicine. The kinds of publications which we put out is the Access to Medicine Index, which I think is what we're most well known for. It comes out every 2 years. Earlier this year, we published the first antimicrobial resistance benchmark. Last year, we published the first Access to Vaccine Index. And intermittently, we'll publish these thematic studies, the most recent one focusing on access to cancer care. And then we spend a lot of time doing what I'm doing today, advancing the debate, engaging in access to medicine issues, raising questions, taking feedback, to try and build a better framework for evaluating companies. So thinking about the Access to Medicine Index as a tool for driving positive change. So what we do is we rank 20 of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies based on their access to medicine performances for high-burden diseases in low-middle-income countries across these 7 areas. So strategy, the governance of access to medicine, R&D, of course, pricing, licensing, capacity building, and donations. And the 2018 index will be the 10th edition. Sorry, the 10-year anniversary. So today what I wanted to focus on is this question of sustainability and access to medicine, particularly as it pertains to the companies that we measure. And I'm going to cover 2 aspects of this question. So first of all, how the Foundation has observed companies moving over the last 10 years from a philanthropic approach to access to one which is more based in sustainability. And by that I mean initiatives for which there is an incentive for the company to maintain an engagement in the longer term, a motivation for continuing to remain engaged, ensuring that those people who need the products will continue to be able to access it over the longer term. Secondly, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've adjusted our evaluation of drug donation programs to accommodate concerns about the longer-term sustainability of these programs. And in doing so, I think I'll pick up on some of the points that were made by previous speakers on the panel. So, access to medicine strategies. They can also support business objectives. And this is one of the drivers that we've seen in companies moving from a purely philanthropic approach to access to medicine to more commercially oriented business models. The drivers are many. One thing I would note is that in the 2016 index, 12 of the companies that we measure explicitly provided evidence that in determining their access to medicine strategies, they were able to identify how they supported wider corporate goals and were at least partially supported by business rationales. So examples of those sorts of rationales is that the growth potential in emerging markets, so 50% of growth in the pharmaceutical market is expected to come from emerging markets, though this has been slowing over recent years. Another important rationale is around enhancing reputation. Another one is if you're intending to move into a market in the longer term, you want to build strong relationships within that market and connections, understand how the market operates. One is strengthening the pharmaceutical value chain. So if you're engaging in capacity building in low and middle income countries and you want to supply your product in the longer term, you want to ensure that the supply chain is robust. You want to ensure that there are controls on falsified or substandard medicines, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes sense to invest. This idea that in low and middle income countries, there's still growth which is coming from the generic medicines market. And there are more constraints in high-income markets, so slowdown in product approvals, greater pricing pressure, so there's incentives there to move to what might be considered more untapped markets. So some examples. So today, or at least last year, around 33% of Sanofi's revenues came from emerging markets, around about 25% for AstraZeneca, around about 25% for Novartis. And statements from pharma CEOs sort of echo this trend, so bear with me. So one quote from Johnson & Johnson: "There's a big growth opportunity in emerging markets. Despite some ups and downs, we will likely to continue to grow at 3 to 4 times the rate we're seeing in developed countries." Echoing that from Sanofi, some 80% of the world's population lives in emerging markets. Many of those people are not treated today. Many of those people are gaining greater incomes, and that's going to be a strong growth driver. So the figure on the right-hand side is just sort of looking at how you might take different access to medicine approaches, determining, based on the income segment that you're targeting. So where there is a little or an absent market, of course, you're looking at structured donation programs, which is what we've been speaking a lot about today. But for other population tiers, you might elect for non-exclusive voluntary licensing, you might elect for patient assistance programs, tenders, different forms of equitable pricing, so things like intra-country equitable pricing or inter-country equitable pricing. So some of the evidence that we've seen from companies trialling approaches in low and middle income countries are these business models, which are all explicitly targeted at the base of the pyramid, and they integrate various components of what I've been explaining and what other panel members have already mentioned. So they tend to emphasize the value of partnerships, they tend to incorporate aspects of capacity building, and they tend to emphasize things such as local entrepreneurship. So one example would be Novo Nordisk's base of the pyramid model, which focuses on increased awareness and education of diabetes, early diagnosis, training of healthcare professionals, ensuring a stable supply, and really focusing on shared responsibility, so engaging the support of governments, patients, and the company to maintain a supply of more affordable insulin over the longer term. The GSK model with Barclays Live Well, I singled out because it focuses on local entrepreneurship, where community health entrepreneurs earn a living while serving local communities. So it's building employment in local communities while using that as a mechanism for the supply chain and to make sure that products are available and affordable. So to finish, I just wanted to focus on this issue of donation programs and sustainable access to medicine. And I think something that we've heard at the Foundation from different stakeholders that we engage in is that donation programs, there's always this concern about sustainability in the longer term. How can we ensure that companies remain engaged? And I think I, first of all, want to emphasize that, of course, they remain a central approach for improving access to medicine for certain populations and diseases, particularly where there is little or an absent market. But of course, sustainable access to pharmaceuticals can be better guaranteed over the longer term through things such as equitable pricing or licensing than through donations, where there's an economic reason for the company to remain engaged. So we made a couple of adjustments to the 2018 index. One is evidence of consideration of the long-term success of the program. And what we're doing is separating out conditions where elimination, eradication is a possibility from chronic conditions. And what we're looking for from companies where elimination is a possibility to have a clear public commitment that they're going to remain engaged until elimination goals are achieved. So for example, companies like MSD, Merck KGaA, GSK, all of those programs are committed to remain engaged in the game until elimination is achieved. Where we're looking at chronic conditions, I think it becomes a little bit more complex. And that's where donation programs tend to fall foul of some criticism that they're just not the most sustainable approach. So, for example, if you're engaged in an insulin donation program and the donation program ends, then where are you going to get access to insulin? So we're evaluating companies newly on the degree to which they're engaged in transition planning with local governments, how they treat patients when they're no longer eligible for the donation program, and what sort of plans are put in place. Recognizing that it has to come from both sides. There has to be engagement from the government